The man next door. I never thought one trip could change everything. It was supposed to be simple, just another getaway, a break from routine, a chance to breathe away from the responsibilities waiting for me back home. I had always played by the rules, lived the life expected of me, built the foundation of what most would call a perfect marriage. But deep down, I knew there was something missing, something I had never dared to name. And then, I met him. It started as nothing more than a glance, an accidental meeting in the dim hallway of the hostel, a polite nod, a casual exchange of words. But from the moment I saw him, something in me shifted. There was an undeniable pull, a curiosity that felt dangerous and yet intoxicating. He was staying in the room right next to mine, and with every encounter, the distance between us began to fade. I told myself it was just admiration, that I was imagining the tension crackling between us. After all, I was married, and so was he. But the heart doesn't care for rules. This is the story of how, in a foreign city, in the quiet walls of a small hostel, I found something I never expected. A connection that unraveled everything I thought I knew about myself. If you love stories filled with passion, tension, and deep emotional discoveries, stay until the end. You won't want to miss a single moment. Subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode of these unforgettable stories. I arrived at the hostel late in the afternoon, the golden sun casting long shadows over the cobblestone streets. The air smelled of fresh bread from a bakery down the road, mingling with the faint scent of rain that had passed through earlier. I had been traveling all day, but exhaustion was the last thing on my mind. The building was small, charming in its own way, painted in soft pastel tones with ivy creeping up the walls. It wasn't the kind of place I usually stayed in. Back home, my trips meant high-end hotels, luxury accommodations that matched the life I had built. But this wasn't one of my usual trips. I checked in, exchanged pleasantries with the woman at the front desk, and dragged my suitcase up the narrow stairs. My room was simple, just a bed, a small wooden desk, and a window that opened to a view of the rooftops. The walls were thin, the kind where you could hear footsteps in the hall, the creak of someone moving in the next room. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. A part of me wondered what I was doing here, why I had chosen this place. But I knew. I needed to get away, from the routine, from expectations, from myself. A soft knock at my door pulled me from my thoughts. I turned, hesitant, before opening it just enough to see who it was. He stood there, suitcase in hand, dark eyes locking onto mine with quiet curiosity. "Sorry," he said, in a smooth Italian accent, his voice carrying a warmth that made my stomach tighten unexpectedly. He glanced at the number on my door, then at the one next to it. "Ah, I'm next door." I nodded, stepping back slightly. "Yeah, looks like we're neighbors." A faint smile tugged at his lips. "Matteo." He extended a hand. "James." I shook it, and for a moment, neither of us let go too quickly. His grip was firm, warm, his skin slightly rough, like someone who had spent a lifetime exploring the world with his hands. He smelled faintly of cologne, of something deep and earthy. My fingers twitched as I let go, an unfamiliar tension humming between us. "Well, James," he said, adjusting the strap of his bag over his shoulder, "it looks like we'll be seeing a lot of each other." I didn't know what to say to that. My throat felt dry, as if my own body was reacting to something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. Matteo gave a small nod and turned toward his room, slipping inside. I exhaled, leaning against the doorframe for a second longer than necessary before stepping back into my own space. I tried to ignore the way my pulse had quickened. That evening, after a shower and an attempt to collect myself, I headed downstairs to the hostel's shared lounge. A few travelers sat in groups, some engaged in quiet conversations, others reading. The lighting was warm, the scent of freshly brewed coffee lingering in the air. And then I saw him. Mateo sat by the window, legs crossed, flipping through a small notebook. His dark hair was slightly tousled, his sleeves rolled up just enough to reveal the curve of his forearms. I wasn't supposed to notice details like that. I wasn't supposed to feel the sudden rush of warmth that spread through me. Before I could think better of it, I walked toward him. "Mind if I join you?" He glanced up, his lips curving in that same unreadable smile. "Please." I sat down, and for a moment, silence stretched between us. Not uncomfortable, but charged with something unspoken. "Business or pleasure?" he asked, closing his notebook. I hesitated. "Business, but I wanted a change of pace." He nodded, as if he understood something I wasn't saying. "Same. My wife thought I needed a break. She was right." Wife. The word settled between us like a weight, a reminder, a boundary. "I have one of those, too," I found myself saying, the words tasting strange in my mouth at that moment. Mateo studied me, his eyes searching for something I wasn't sure I wanted him to find. And then, in the quiet hum of the room, he said something I wasn't expecting. "And do you ever wonder what it would be like to break the routine?" My breath hitched, my fingers curling against my knee, because the answer was yes. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to fight it. I barely slept that night. The walls were thin, and I could hear faint movements from the room next door. A suitcase being unzipped, the rustle of fabric, footsteps crossing the small space. Mateo was settling in, just like I was. But it wasn't the noise keeping me awake. It was the conversation we had downstairs. "And do you ever wonder what it would be like to break the routine?" His words had settled into my mind like a whispered temptation, looping in my head as I lay in the dim glow of the streetlight filtering through my window. I told myself I was overthinking it. He didn't mean anything by it. It was just two married men sharing a casual thought about life's monotony. But deep down, I knew better. By morning, I convinced myself that I had imagined the tension between us, that whatever flicker of something I thought I had seen in his eyes was just in my head. I had spent years perfecting the art of denial. It was second nature to me now. I got dressed in something casual, ran a hand through my hair, and headed downstairs. The common area was quiet, a few travelers sipping coffee, scrolling through their phones. The scent of fresh bread and espresso filled the air. And then I saw him. Mateo stood near the front desk, speaking with the woman behind the counter. He had that effortless look about him, dark jeans, a fitted t-shirt, sleeves rolled up just enough to show his forearms, sunglasses hooked onto the collar of his shirt. He was laughing at something she said, his smile easy, natural. I told myself to turn around, walk the other way. But then his eyes flicked to me, and before I could react, he lifted a hand in greeting. "James?" he called, motioning for me to come over. Damn it. I forced a polite smile and walked toward him, ignoring the strange way my pulse picked up. "Morning," I said, keeping my voice casual. "Did you sleep well?" "Like a rock," I lied. He smirked slightly, as if he could tell. "I was just asking about the best places to see around here. Apparently there's a market in the town square today. Thought I'd check it out." "Sounds nice." "You should come," he said easily, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "It'd be better than wandering alone." I hesitated. Spending more time with him felt like a bad idea, but it also felt like the only thing I wanted to do. Sure, I said before I could stop myself. The market was alive with color and sound. Stalls lined the cobblestone streets, vendors calling out in thick accents, offering everything from fresh produce to handcrafted jewelry. The scent of roasted coffee and baked pastries filled the air. We walked side by side, stopping here and there, making small talk. It felt easy, normal, like we were just two men enjoying the day. But then there were the moments. Like when he reached past me to grab a piece of fruit from a stall, and his arm brushed against mine, lingering just a second too long. Or when we both reached for the same item at a vendor's table, our hands touching briefly. Neither of us moved away too quickly. You travel a lot for work? I asked as we wandered deeper into the market. More than my wife likes, he admitted with a small smile. She says I get restless too easily, that I always need to be somewhere else. Is she right? Matteo looked at me then, really looked, as if weighing his answer. Maybe, he said, voice quieter. Maybe I'm always looking for something, even when I don't know what it is. I swallowed hard, something tightening in my chest. James, he said after a moment, stopping in his tracks. I turned to face him, the crowd moving around us, the world bustling with life while we stood frozen in it. You ever think about it? His voice was lower now, like a confession neither of us were supposed to make. Think about what? I asked, though I already knew. He studied me for a second longer before shaking his head, as if deciding against saying whatever had been on his mind. Never mind. But I knew it wasn't nothing. The air between us was charged now, something unsaid buzzing just beneath the surface. And the worst part? I didn't want it to stop. I told myself I wouldn't overthink it. The words, the glances, the way his arm brushed against mine in the market. It was all just harmless interaction, wasn't it? Two men, married, finding common ground and shared experiences. That was all. At least, that's what I tried to believe. By the time we returned to the hostel, the sky had started shifting into soft shades of orange and pink, the town settling into the quiet hum of early evening. Matteo and I walked side by side down the narrow street, the cobblestones uneven beneath our steps. I'm grabbing a drink later, he said casually. There's a bar just down the road. You should come. It wasn't an invitation I should have accepted. Yeah, why not? I said. The bar was small, intimate. Dim lighting, old wooden tables, the scent of whiskey and aged leather hanging in the air. A quiet jazz tune played in the background, blending with the low hum of conversation. Matteo sat across from me, a glass of deep red wine in his hand. He swirled it absent-mindedly, his fingers trailing along the rim before taking a slow sip. I had a whiskey in front of me, untouched. So, he said, leaning back slightly, tell me about your wife. I let out a small breath, lifting the glass to my lips, more for something to do than anything else. Her name's Emily. We met in college, been together ever since. He studied me, like he was waiting for more. And we have a good life. She's amazing, beautiful, smart. Matteo tilted his head. But? I should have stopped the conversation there. I should have laughed, brushed it off, changed the subject. But the warmth of the bar, the way he was looking at me, it pulled something loose inside me. But sometimes I wonder if this is it. If this is everything I'm meant to be. Matteo nodded, as if he understood something I hadn't said out loud. You? I asked, turning the question on him. Laura, he said, smiling a little. We've been married for 10 years. She's good to me, kind, steady. That sounds nice? It is. He took another sip, then set his glass down carefully. But sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's life. My stomach tightened. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of those words pressing between us. The jazz tune changed to something slower, deeper. I finally took a sip of my whiskey, letting it burn down my throat. And then, so softly I almost didn't hear it, Mateo said, "I think I knew from the moment I saw you." My fingers tensed around the glass. "Knew what?" He exhaled, shaking his head with a quiet chuckle, like he was laughing at himself. "Never mind." But I knew. I felt it. The tension that had been buzzing between us wasn't in my head. It was real. And now, we both knew it. We walked back to the hostel in silence. The streets were mostly empty now, the air cooler, the sound of our footsteps echoing between the old buildings. When we reached the hallway, standing between our doors, I turned to say something, to brush it all off, to act like nothing had changed. But Mateo was already watching me. He took a step closer, close enough that I could see the slight stubble on his jaw, the way his lips parted just slightly, like he was debating something. My heart was hammering. "Good night, James," he said, voice low. I nodded, swallowing hard. "Good night, Mateo." He hesitated, just for a second, then reached for his door. And I did the same, closing myself into my room before I did something I couldn't take back. But I knew. This wasn't over. Not even close. I barely made it through the night. The air in my room felt heavier than before, thick with unspoken thoughts, with words that had lingered between us at the bar. I kept replaying the way Mateo had looked at me in the hallway, how his voice had dipped just slightly when he said goodnight. It had been nothing, and yet it had been everything. I told myself to sleep, to shut it out, to wake up in the morning and act as if it never happened. But my body knew better than my mind. It was alert, wired, restless. At some point, I must have dozed off because the sound of a loud knock startled me awake. I blinked against the morning light streaming through the curtains, my pulse spiking. The knock came again, more urgent this time. I swung my legs over the bed and made my way to the door, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. When I opened it, Mateo stood there, his brows furrowed, looking more tense than I had ever seen him. "We need to get out of here," he said. I frowned. "What?" "The hostel," he said, glancing over his shoulder down the hallway. "Something's happened." I stepped into the corridor, following his gaze. The air smelled different, a faint, acrid scent of something burned. Downstairs, muffled voices rose in agitation, a sharp contrast to the quiet morning I had expected. "What's going on?" I asked. Mateo ran a hand through his hair, his fingers tense. "I don't know exactly, but I heard the owner arguing with someone outside, and then I smelled it. Smoke." That's when I saw it. The slight haze in the air, barely visible but unmistakable. My stomach dropped. We turned at the same time, heading for the stairs. As we descended, the voices grew louder, panic lacing the words. The common area was filled with guests standing near the front entrance, bags in hand, their expressions ranging from confusion to worry. The owner, a middle-aged woman with a frazzled look, was speaking to a small group. "It's under control," she insisted, her voice calm but her eyes tight with worry. "The fire started in the back storage area. It didn't spread much, but the electricity's out, and we need to check for damage before letting anyone stay." "Can we still grab our things?" someone asked. The owner hesitated. "Quickly." Mateo turned to me, his jaw set. "We should find another place to stay." I nodded. It was the logical choice. But that wasn't what made my stomach twist. It was the realization that we were about to leave this place. That whatever had been happening between us, whatever had been quietly building, would be severed the moment we walked away from this hostel and went our separate ways. "There's a small hotel down the street," Mateo continued, adjusting the strap of his bag. "I passed it yesterday." He was waiting for me to respond, to agree, to say something. I hesitated. I should have told him I'd booked something else, that we didn't need to stay together. But the thought of sleeping in a room without his presence next door, without the quiet hum of his existence lingering in the air between thin walls, made my chest ache. "Let's go," I said. We walked side by side down the street, the scent of smoke still lingering in the air. The town felt different now, less inviting, more uncertain. Matteo didn't say much as we made our way to the small hotel he had mentioned. It was modest, tucked between two old stone buildings, but it was enough. The receptionist greeted us with a tired smile, her fingers typing away at an old computer. "One room or two?" she asked. The question should have been simple, but it wasn't. I turned to Matteo, but he was already looking at me, his expression unreadable. And for a moment it felt like we were standing on the edge of something that couldn't be undone. Matteo didn't answer right away. Neither did I. The woman at the reception looked between us, waiting, her fingers poised over the keyboard. The air felt thick, like a decision too fragile to put into words. "Two," I finally said, my voice steadier than I felt. "2 rooms." Matteo nodded, barely noticeable, as if he had expected the answer but wasn't sure how he felt about it. The receptionist clicked a few keys, handed us our room keys, and gave directions to the second floor. Matteo thanked her, and we made our way up the narrow staircase, our footsteps the only sound between us. When we reached our rooms side by side once again, something inside me twisted. Déjà vu. Except this time, it wasn't a hostel. It wasn't an accident. It was a choice. Matteo hesitated for a second, then turned his key, pushing open the door to his room. I followed suit, stepping inside mine, letting the door close softly behind me. And just like that, we were separated. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling sharply. I should have felt relieved. I should have felt like I had done the right thing. But I didn't. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the blank wall, willing myself to think of something else. But all I could hear was his voice in my head. "And do you ever wonder what it would be like to break the routine?" I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, rubbing my palms together. This was ridiculous. I was acting like a schoolboy with a crush, like a man who had never been looked at the way Matteo looked at me, like a man who had never wanted something he couldn't have. An hour passed, maybe 2. I tried to distract myself, unpacked a little, checked my emails, pretended I wasn't thinking about the man next door, but the weight in my chest only grew heavier. And then, a knock. Soft, hesitant. I knew who it was before I even opened the door. Matteo stood there, one hand in his pocket, the other resting lightly on the door frame. His gaze was unreadable, but his presence was undeniable. "I was going to take a walk," he said after a moment. "Thought I'd see if you wanted to come." I should have said no. Instead, I grabbed my jacket. "Yeah, let's go." The streets were quieter than earlier, the market long since packed up, the storefronts dimly lit. We walked without a destination, just moving through the night, the cool air settling between us. It wasn't until we reached a small overlook, a stone wall that separated the town from the open hillside, that Matteo finally spoke. "I wasn't sure if you'd open the door," he admitted, his voice quieter than usual. I swallowed. I wasn't sure if I should. He turned to me, studying my face in the dim glow of the street lamp. "But you did." I looked away, my hands gripping the edge of the stone wall. "Matteo?" "James," he cut in, his voice careful, deliberate. "You don't have to explain anything to me, He exhaled, shaking his head slightly. "I don't know what I'm doing either." My throat tightened. This was real. Whatever this was whatever had been circling around us, growing heavier with every second, it was real. I could feel it, and I knew he could too. The silence stretched, charged with something unspoken. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel the slow, deliberate way Mateo turned to face me completely. And then, his hand, brushing lightly against mine on the stone wall, just a touch, barely there. But it burned. I didn't move. Neither did he. And I knew, if I looked at him now, if I let myself see whatever was written in his eyes, this would tip into something neither of us could take back. So I stayed still. But I didn't pull away. The night air felt heavier, charged with something neither of us dared to name. Mateo's fingers barely brushed against mine, resting on the cold stone wall. But the warmth of that touch spread through me like fire. I should have pulled away. I should have stepped back, said something casual, broken the moment before it broke me. But I didn't. Slowly, I turned to him, meeting his gaze beneath the dim glow of the street lamp. There was no hesitation in his eyes, no confusion, just quiet certainty, a slow unraveling of something we had both been avoiding. My breath felt tight in my chest, my hands curling into fists at my sides. "You don't have to," Mateo murmured, his voice impossibly soft, as if he could hear the war raging inside me. I swallowed hard. I know. But I didn't move. He was close now, so close that I could see the way his chest rose and fell with each breath, could see the way the faintest hint of stubble shadowed his jaw. My body betrayed me before my mind could catch up. A slight shift, an unconscious leaning forward, a surrender to the pull that had been between us from the beginning. And then, finally, I felt him. His lips barely brushed against mine, tentative at first, testing. My pulse thundered in my ears as I responded, my fingers gripping the stone wall behind me as if I needed something to keep me grounded. It wasn't rushed, wasn't reckless, just slow, deliberate, an unspoken admission of everything we had tried to ignore. Mateo pulled back first, just enough for our foreheads to touch, his breath warm against my skin. My heart was still racing, my body still trembling with something I didn't have the words for. "We can stop," he whispered. I should have said yes. I should have walked away. But instead I closed my eyes and let my fingers curl around the fabric of his sleeve, holding him there, silently asking for more, because I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. The morning came too quickly. The golden light spilled through the curtains of my hotel room, stretching across the sheets where Mateo had been just hours before. I blinked against the brightness, my body aching with the weight of reality settling in. I could still feel him. The way his hands had traced my skin, the way he had whispered my name against my throat like it was something sacred. It had been inevitable from the moment we met, hadn't it? A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. My heart lurched. I knew who it was before I even opened it. Mateo stood there, his expression unreadable, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jeans. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "We should talk," he finally said, his voice quieter than usual. I exhaled slowly, stepping aside to let him in. He hesitated before crossing the threshold, and I knew in that moment that whatever we said next would change everything, forever.